In our last episode, Abdulmecid's empire glittered with reforms, ministries, codes, uniforms, even a new fleet. But beneath the surface, resentment smoldered. For every law proclaimed in Istanbul, there was a province that resisted. The Tanzimat was not binding the empire together, it was tearing it apart. This is road to destruction, the world wars. The first sparks came in the Arab provinces. In Syria, the Tanzimat collided head-on with communities still shaped by Muhammad Ali's decade of rule. The Egyptian system of conscription and taxation had already scarred the Druze and Maronite mountaineers, and when the Ottomans reimposed new levies and draft orders in the 1840s, it was met with revolt. Druze sheikhs in Mount Lebanon refused Istanbul's orders, rejecting a state that demanded sons for armies and coin for treasuries, while Arab notables in Damascus roused townsmen against inspectors sent from the capital. The Sublime Porte responded with troops, but suppression only deepened the bitterness that would later explode in sectarian massacres in the 1860s. Syria was a warning. Reform imposed from the center looked to its people like just another foreign occupation. Merchants muttered that equal status for Christians tilted the scales against them, that the Tanzimat was not reform, but foreign meddling dressed in fine words. In Baghdad and the plains of Mesopotamia, Tanzimat officials tried to extend tax registers and conscription rolls into regions where Ottoman control had long been nominal. Tribal sheikhs and Kurdish agas resisted fiercely, staging raids on Ottoman garrisons and tax caravans. The Ottoman response was classic Tanzimat, a blend of reformist ideal and raw violence. Governors like Namuk Pasha marched against tribes with cannon, forcing them to submit. But the cycle repeated year after year. Discontent simmered among both Sunni tribes and Shia communities, long skeptical of Ottoman rule. Here, clerics denounced reform as heresy, and local governors often looked the other way, caught between imperial orders and the danger of inflaming revolt. Abdulmecid's empire looked united on maps, but on the ground, obedience was conditional, fragile, and costly. In Kurdistan, the rebellion of Bedir Khan Beg in the 1840s stood out. A powerful Kurdish emir, Bedir Khan resisted centralization and Tanzimat decrees, carving out an almost independent principality. His defiance was crushed only after years of campaigns, culminating in 1847, when Ottoman troops, with quiet European encouragement, finally subdued him. Bedir Khan was exiled, but the suppression came at a cost. Tens of thousands displaced, villages razed, and Kurdish distrust of Istanbul hardened for generations. For Abdulmecid, it was a bitter lesson that reform often meant civil war by another name. It symbolized a truth the Tanzimat could not suppress. Beyond the capital, real power still lay with men whose legitimacy came from tribe, faith, and sword. Each rebellion revealed a paradox. The Tanzimat promised equality and law, but it required brute force to enforce them. Abdulmecid found himself torn between ideals and suppression, declaring rights in the capital while dispatching armies to the provinces. His faith in law remained, but the lesson was unavoidable. Reforms provoked rebellion faster than they delivered unity, and every campaign carried another hidden cost. To march armies into Kurdistan or the plains of Mesopotamia meant borrowing, first from the Galata bankers of Istanbul, then through the credit networks of Europe. Each rebellion crushed left not just ashes in the provinces, but new chains of debt in the capital. The Ottomans were fighting their own subjects with money borrowed from foreigners who would later claim repayment in influence. All of this unfolded as Europe itself trembled. In 1848, barricades rose in Paris, revolutionaries stormed Vienna, and monarchs from Naples to Berlin tottered on the edge of collapse. Abdulmecid's throne did not shake in the same way, but the echoes were impossible to ignore. In Vienna, Metternich, the great stabilizer of Europe and ally of the Ottoman order, fled into exile. Franz Josef rose to the Habsburg throne amid the rubble of Hungarian revolt, in which Lajos Kossuth preached independence, his fiery words echoing into Ottoman lands where subject peoples listened closely. Bismarck watched from Prussia as liberals and reactionaries clashed. Napoleon III seized power in France with a promise of order, and Nicholas I of Russia posed as Europe's gendarme. Against this backdrop, the Ottoman state seemed strangely inverted. While Europe's monarchs feared their peoples, the Ottoman Sultan was fighting to make his people accept reforms Europe demanded. To the British, especially Stratford Canning, the rebellions were useful leverage, proof that Istanbul needed guidance, loans, and British mediation. For the Ottoman state, this was no victory. European revolution meant European distraction. Britain and Austria, who had once saved the empire from Muhammad Ali, were consumed by their own crises, and when they recovered, they did so more suspicious than ever of instability. If the Ottomans could not keep order at home, then European protection would have to become firmer, more direct. Abdulmecid ruled an empire that was at once modern and medieval. In Istanbul, he presided over balls, operas, and bureaucrats fluent in French. In the provinces, his armies fought sheikhs, beys, and tribal leaders who treated the Tanzimat as foreign intrusion. Europe praised reform in words, but demanded stability in deeds. Stability the empire could only enforce with violence. The Ottoman army, rebuilt on European lines, had to be sent again and again into the mountains and deserts to crush leaders who claimed loyalty only when convenient. Each crackdown left the countryside devastated, the treasury drained, and the army spread thinner. The irony was brutal. The Tanzimat, intended to bind the provinces closer to the center, instead kept the empire fighting wars against its own subjects. The lesson for Abdulmecid was bitter. Applause from Europe never stopped the rebellions. Promises of equality did not bring loyalty, and each suppression, each plea for European mediation, only revealed how fragile the empire had become. By 1850, most fires were tamped down, but none were truly out. Each pacified province had been bought with borrowed money and borrowed authority, and every dispatch to Europe read less like diplomacy than a plea for reassurance. In London, Vienna, Paris, and St. Petersburg, the Ottomans were no longer a partner to be respected, but a problem to be managed. Abdulmecid found himself in a paradox. In Europe, emperors feared their people. In Istanbul, the Sultan feared he could not reach his people at all. Reform had promised strength but delivered insurrections. Law had promised justice but was enforced by cannon. The Tanzimat was not just resisted. It had set the empire at war with itself. The Eastern question shifted from villages to chancelleries. Britain and Austria spoke of stability. France courted prestige in the Levant, and Russia pressed its claims as protector of Orthodox Christians. In private, a cruel shorthand began to circulate for an empire that could not stand without help. A sick man, ailing, manageable, perhaps terminal. In our next episode, The Great Game and the Sick Man, the chessboard widens. Holy places become diplomatic pretexts. The straits a bargaining chip, and Tsar Nicholas whispers a nickname that will haunt Istanbul. Abdulmecid finds that the empire's fate is being negotiated in foreign capitals long before a single shot is fired. This is Road to Destruction, the World Wars.